Thank you, Dorothy. Now let's shift to Benjamin Wiederkehr. Correct?
Correct.
Wow. So Benjamin is an interaction designer with a focus on information visualization and interface design. He's a founding partner and managing director of Interactive Things, a studio based in Zurich, I think. So today I'm glad to hear his presentation, because as you know, a lot of people think nowadays that data can solve pretty much everything, like journalism, industry. So you can say us today if it's true, or if we are in a bubble, or maybe in the middle of something. Thank you very much.
Hi. So, hello everyone. My name is Benjamin. As just has been introduced, I am a founding partner and currently managing director of Interactive Things. We are a design studio based in Zurich, a team of 11 people. We are mostly focused on user experience design and data visualization. Since 6 years, I also write about the field of information visualization. It's a website, it's called datavisualization.ch. It's where we publish, document, and also discuss our findings from research, both in the academic as well as in the applied work that we do. When I got asked to speak at the event today, and when I looked through the program of speakers talking at this event, or that already talked at this event, I got slightly nervous. Telling data-driven stories is something that we do, that's true. It's also something that I reflect upon quite heavily, especially in the past, because there are a few questions in my mind that I don't have the answers to just yet. Because when I look at the work that we do in our studio and the work that the whole community of visualization design does worldwide, I see ourselves much more as craftsmen. I see ourselves much more as creators of tools rather than tellers of stories, rather than authors. And the tool is an artifact that helps overcome human limitations to achieve a certain goal, whereas a story is a series of chronological events that are enriched through the discourse by manipulation of the story through the presentation of the narrative. Or simply put, a tool is something that helps you do a thing that you can't do without it, and a story is a thing that punches you in the face so that you remember it 2 hours, 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years later. And in that sense, I'm curious how this balance between a tool creator who tells story, how that unfolds. And I looked at one of the great examples of information design to understand if this really tells a story or if it doesn't. This is Napoleon's March to Russia by Charles-Joseph Minard. I am sure most of you know it. And what we see is the march of the army to Russia, the battle in Russia, and then the march back into France. We see a diminishing number of members of the army, and we see how that changes over time. So my question is, does this map truly tell the story of thousands of soldiers dying in battle, starving in the Russian winter, or drowning when they crossed a certain river? Or does it just show a very big number getting very small over a series of months and over a few hundred kilometers? So I came to the realization that the first picture speaks very much to the brain. It speaks very much to our analytical, to our rational reasoning. And it doesn't very much speak to our emotional side, to our very human self. It doesn't speak very much to our heart. So what if we could combine these two layers? What if we could combine the analytical and the emotional? When I think about if we could, and if so, then how, I see two different ways. I see visualization in storytelling, so as part of the narration, and I see storytelling in visualization, so narration being a part of visualization. And I would like to talk about two projects that we created that do these different things. The first project was called Keine Zeit für Wut, which means no time for anger, and it was a multimedia, multi-channel reporting that we did together with the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, which is a daily journal in Switzerland. Today, 3 years ago, a little bit over that, there was a very strong earthquake. Consequentially, there was a very, very severe tsunami that struck the prefecture of Fukushima in Japan. The Neue Zürcher Zeitung headed immediately after the event to Japan to do the reporting. And last year, 2 years after the event, they wanted to head back to find the very human stories told by the people who survived the catastrophe and how their life changed and evolved over these 2 years. So our first step was inform ourselves, which meant informing ourselves about research material to understand the quantitative, so the analytical parts of this story. But it also meant informing ourselves about the situation in Japan, and by sending 3 people to Japan to do the reporting, to do the photography documentation, and somebody who does the translation of it all, was this first phase where we gathered all the information to understand how it looks and feels. And we needed to, of course, prepare the materials, so double-checking the sources, verifying, getting second opinion, and so on. When we had our material, we started exploring it, and you see ourselves here crammed in a studio in Zurich, Switzerland, but you can also imagine exploring our 3 people in Japan, talking to people, traveling by foot, by bike, by taxi, and by train. So what we do when we explore, we try to discover things, we try to find insights, we try to see patterns. When we identified areas that are of interest to our reporting, that do tell these very personal stories of the people that we talk to, and at the same time give the broader context of the political situation, of the economic situation, of the societal situation. We started sketching things to make our ideas, make them visual, make them objects of discussion, make them objects of thinking. When you have your sketches and when they are becoming visual and tangible, and when you can have a very good discourse about those, it's great to have journalists on your side, because journalists have a wonderful bullshit detector that differentiates between things that are interesting and things that are actually supporting the story that they are trying to tell. And only then, only when we have understood, is it true, is it meaningful, and is it relevant to the story, we are able to move into designing the things that we need to show the user that are impossible just to formulate within words. So designing migration flows, for example, as a way to evacuate the region of Fukushima. This is a series of sketches that we did to understand what would be the best possible way to represent it. And what we found was very interesting is that migration or evacuation actually didn't happen across very long distances, but actually many people were within a 20-mile radius of their home, but had to sleep in shelters, had to sleep in schools, were not able to return back to their homes. So this very strong focus that everybody stayed within the prefecture of Fukushima was a very surprising insight that we gathered. For some visualization, it's just not enough to design them by hand. You have to do some computation that helps you visualize, or in this example, visceralize the data. Because how do you make a metric like sievert, that could be millisievert per year or microsievert per hour, it doesn't really matter. How do you communicate that to somebody who has never heard about the scientific explanation of radiation? We came up with a solution that makes a correlation between the effect of particles crashing into your body and the effect that raindrops have when it tickles as well as when it pours. Just as well as when we map those back to the geography to represent how evacuation zones and zones of radiation overlap or where they don't. So after we created all of these quantitative assets, it was an important next step to evaluate them, to double check together with the people who are writing the story if they are actually supporting and in a meaningful way the personal stories and the personal destinies that they were reporting about. And only then we are able to deliver it to the readers and share it with the broader community. So the end result was a long-form multimedia report that included text as well as images, as well as video interviews together with those quantitative information visualizations that stated the facts. The second approach of how do we bring narration into visualization, I want to touch briefly on with a project that we did for the UNESCO, which was called WIDE, which is a not so elegant abbreviation for World Inequalities Database on Education. But it's all about demarginalization and deprivation from education. If we look most of the time at indexes like this, we realize that we always talk about country averages, but a country average is a very insufficient, is a very unfair metric to understand personal stories of people living in such a country. So we are able to drill down into the individual dimensions of demography. We are able to look at them side by side, and we are even able to combine them. But I have to ask myself, do we really tell the story that if you are born in Somalia, if you are born as a girl in Somalia, especially in the south-west region of the country, and if you happen to be born in one of the poorest households, that you have a 99% chance to never see a classroom from the inside? Or do we just show colorful bubbles on ranges between 0 and 100. So it's a very tough question for us to tell if storytelling is even present in this example. If they are present, then I need to ask myself, like, are we the authors? And it becomes very important to me that, as has been said in the introduction, we want participants much rather than consumers, because there are two very important effects. The first one is visualization doesn't equal truth, and that's a very important point to make and to understand. It looks very much truthful, what we show, but we need our readers to question what we show them. Visualization, even if it's based on actual data, is a device to take a picture of the world. It's much more like photography, and photography is never objective. Photography always chooses a certain angle, chooses a certain moment in time, decides to leave away things and decides to focus on others. So in that sense, we want every one of our audience to become an active and a critical participant in our exploration of data. And the second reason why it is important that we want to have participants much rather than consumers is that applied knowledge, so self-attained knowledge, is much more memorable than something that has been told to us, something that we have memorized. And I think at this point it is very great that I have the pleasure to follow up on these great speeches, because how better to apply our own knowledge if we have a playing ground as a readership, that we have a world that we can explore, much rather than a single narrative. It has been told the examples of immersive stories, immersive worlds. To me, it becomes obvious that be it Middle-earth, or be it the universe in Star Wars, or be it Pandora, I guess, in Avatar, these are worlds where this specific story ever so happens, but the world is explicited in so much detail that the reader can form their own stories, that you can form your own narrative and fill in the gaps that the author left away. So in that sense, and also in the sense of the things that we have seen in Maptia, we create worlds that we let others tell their stories within, much rather than focusing them on one single narrative. I would like to show 3 more examples. This one, an example by my friends, Periscopic, explores the lost lives through gun death in the United States. So what we see is the life that has been lived as the orange part of the arc, and the gray one as the imaginative rest of the life that this person statistically might have had, weren't it for the death caused by handguns. This piece, beside having a narrated introduction into the data set, eventually lets the user take ownership, lets the user start exploring the data himself, lets the user filter, focus, select, lets the user re-encode the data set to understand it from different angles. In a second example from the good fellows at Pitch Interactive is a narrative piece of data visualization talking about the death through drone strikes in the wars in Afghanistan and the other countries around the Middle East. So what we see is a timeline that that represents the drone strikes and correlates them with certain political events, and we see the casualties and how severely the casualties on the civil side are much higher than the casualties on the military side, especially looking at core focus targets. Also, this visualization, after the introduction, after the narration, allows the user to explore the data himself, to search for counterfactuals, to question the data source. So you are able to select individual events or re-encode the data in a different way. A last piece without any introduction, without any words, shows nothing beside the airflows over the North American country, the North American continent. There is no story visible right now beside densities and certain flows. But if we jump to a certain point in time, namely December 2012, it tells a very vivid story that most of us remember. And I would like to conclude with an experiment of having a very minimal visualization that I did and still ignite a very vivid story in your brains. What you see here is life expectancy of a normal human being. Actually not, because this is the life expectancy of a male human being, because a female human being has a few more to go statistically. But this is my life. This is the filled squares are the years that I had to live so far. The empty ones are the ones that I still have in front of me, statistically speaking. This doesn't mean anything to you, but it means everything to me, because I remember vividly how I filled those. And so I would like to have you look at the grid, have you look at it, and fill it with your own squares. Review the ones that you have already filled, and imagine how you plan to fill the ones that are yet to come. By doing this, I give you the canvas and the permission to tell your own story. Thank you very much.
So, thank you also for reminding us that visualization is not truth and data are not synonymous for facts. But my question is there any way to avoid bias on data gathering in your own experience? Or?
Yeah, the question, I might be the wrong person to be asked because I am not an expert in data gathering, which should be the job of the researchers. But I am an expert in verifying that the data has been collected in the right way and that it sort of the insights that we believe to be in there, that they're actually in there. So of course, and this is a very important thing, data collection can be the first place where bias sort of can be infused, where bias can be started. So how you ask questions in a survey, what specific demography that you ask these questions, where geographically that you ask them, are all factors that will definitely affect the data set that you will end up with.
Thank you very much.
All right.